Hello, visionary tribe of Entheo Nation. You are here with Lorna Liana, and today I have a fantastic guest, someone that I've admired greatly, who travels all around the world in search of medicinal plants. His name is Chris Kilham, and he is also known as the Medicine Hunter. So, welcome to the show today, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Lorna. Happy to be on with you and your tribe out there.
I am so curious about what it takes to create an awesome career and professional path like yours. So I'd love if you would start off our conversation today with, your story about how you actually became the medicine hunter.
Okay, I'll try to keep it real and brief. I think what it takes actually is dogged persistence, I have to say. I was very fortunate to get interested in herbs and plant medicines in my late teens. It just kind of became a little bit fascinating for me, and over time, working in the natural product sector and learning from herbalists and reading probably hundreds of books and traveling, I became more and more knowledgeable and expert about medicinal plants and their uses and the traditions like Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, North American Indian herbology.
Hello, Chris. You just froze up.
Projects.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry about that. You just froze
really.
up.
Okay.
So you
Where
you
did
said
it? Where,
herbology. We're gonna just continue on. Herbology.
okay. I don't know which part I was in though at that
You were
point.
talking about the your background
Yes,
studying
yes.
and your passion for
Right,
plants.
right. So how long did I freeze up?
Oh, just for like 2 seconds.
Oh, okay, okay. So, in any case, I eventually became knowledgeable enough that I became known for this, and I was invited to do a couple of projects, and the second project turned out to be wildly successful, and that really set me on a shift in my career to just doing this medicine hunting, traveling around the world, investigating medicinal plants, spices, superfoods, psychoactive agents of all different kinds, cosmetic ingredients all over the world, and working with indigenous native people globally and helping to make trade links between them and in all over the world, and do it in a way that's environmentally sustainable and also fair in terms of wage and other working practices. So it's a big kind of complex activity, and I've been doing medicine hunting for a living now for about I guess it's been a little over 20 years. So it's been a pretty fun ride. Pretty fun.
Wow, I can imagine. So, in your travels, then you must meet a lot of traditional herbalists and herbalist healers and shamans, if you would.
Yeah, yeah, a great many, and they often inform me greatly when wherever I am. If I'm in, well, let's say Malaysia, I want to meet with a traditional Bomo, their particular traditional healer. If I'm in if I'm in China, different parts of China, I want to meet with, acupuncturists, herbalists. South America, meeting with shamans constantly. Yeah, and these people, they carry not only the traditional knowledge, but they also use these things. So they're getting real time, real world experience with people, much the way doctors do in their practices. And so I find it essential to learn from them, and I always seem to be in their company when I do my projects.
Fantastic. So, I'm really curious about your experience with the Amazon shamans. Do you primarily go down to Peru?
I do. I started out, however, in Brazil. My first experience in the Amazon was living with natives on the Amazon River in Brazil for a month, and it was a staggering introduction to the rainforest and native people who live there. And so I did that a few times actually in Brazil, and then shifted to Peru because I initially went to Peru to do some work in the Andes with maca, and wound up going down to the Amazon a few times, and that has turned into probably 30 35 times now, and I'm going, I mean, thing going down there. So I'm often with traditional healers. I'm in traditional villages on a regular basis. I usually can catch an ayahuasca ceremony or two. At the tail end of a project, I'll contact one of the shamans I know and say, "Hey, listen, can I come drink, tomorrow night?" And they go, "Yeah, sure, no problem. Come, we got room." And that's sort of how it goes. So it's a very and my clients pay for all of this, and they all know that I do this. I mean, and they go, "Well, okay, that's Chris, that's what he does. Okay, that's cool, the work's good." So they don't really care that I'm down there drinking ayahuasca, and it's just this interesting thing that we're seeing now, this tidal surge of people from all over the world going down to Ecuador and Colombia and Brazil, but especially Peru, and drinking ayahuasca by the tens of thousands. This is the, probably, with the exception of how readily LSD was taken up during a certain period in the 60s. We've never seen, we've certainly never seen this with any traditional medicine, such a gigantic, psychoactive one, such a gigantic explosion all at once. I mean, there are many, many hundreds of millions of people smoking cannabis and using it in different ways, but that has grown steadily over time, whereas this is like a flash bomb going off. I mean, ayahuasca was not on people's lips for the most part 10 years ago, except for the cognoscenti. I mean, I knew about it in the 70s, but, I didn't get to drink for a long time.
And then
So,
flash forward to now, and here is a video with you on businessinsider.com.
oh, I am so, well. See, okay. Here's the thing, Lorna. With that, and also I will want to mention my book, but I am doing a lot of media. I'm on Fox News, Fox, as in like that Fox News, in 100 countries. I get millions of hits on my articles that are every week, and I get to talk about natural medicines, and I do a lot of stuff on psychoactive plants. And yeah, it seems like an odd home, but I'm reaching the non-converted. I love the converted. I love the tribe. I love, our people, if you will, the people we sit in ceremony with, the people we run into in the cafes, in the funky places way out on the hippie trail, all of those. But there are so many people who aren't that yet, and I'm going after them. So Business Insider, I mean, I can imagine some investors got up the other day and they looked at that and they said, "Oh, I wonder if I should invest or put this ayahuasca in my portfolio." Yeah, man, you definitely should put this in your portfolio, but not the way you're thinking,
Or at least drink it and come up with some, real game changing, tech innovation solution to a major, to climate change.
Right. Yes, exactly.
So I'd love to hear how ayahuasca has actually impacted your life and how it influences or inspired you to write this book, the Ayahuasca Test Pilot Guide, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it's called the Ayahuasca Test Pilots Handbook, the essential guide to ayahuasca journeying. And yeah, I'll give you the backstory on this. I've been drinking for about 8 years now. So, many people have been drinking for longer, whatever, but I went down initially to be healed of grief over my mother's death, and the grief had gone on way too long. And the very first night in my very first ceremony, that was resolved completely. And that was amazing to me. And the next night I spent, pretty much the whole night having energy pounded into my chest by a gigantic, luminous, psychedelic anaconda that hovered over me the whole night, taunting me and just like smashing the hell out of my ribs. Okay, I thought really thought I was going to have busted ribs the next morning. I was so surprised that I was okay. And, over time, I've had extraordinary healings, but very early on, I started bringing people down to Peru. I came back and I said, hey, listen, there's this experience you've got to go have. Come have it with me. And very shortly after I started drinking, I brought my wife Zoe down, and she wasn't going to drink. And I was like, that's cool, no problem. I mean, I would never want somebody to drink if they don't want to drink. And of course, she wound up doing 3 ceremonies with nobody putting pressure, just the fascination of, oh my God, I'm in this place. There's this medicine. Everybody's having these experiences. I want to be part of that. And so over time, in the course of these years of drinking, and now with about, I don't know, 35 or more different shamans, many at lodges, but it's like some, in the guy's like chicken shed, out by a swamp. I mean, all different kinds of places. And talking with now probably a couple thousand people about ayahuasca, because ayahuasca really engenders a lot of conversation. You know how it is. People talk about their experiences and healing, and there's a lot of thought and speculation. And so it's a very conversation heavy scene. And it occurred to me that it would be wonderful to write a useful guide that would help people to know, what is ayahuasca? What are shamans? What are ceremonies? What are ayahuasca ceremonies? What the heck happens? How's this stuff made? What's in it? What's the history? What's the legend, the lore? What are the healing dimensions of ayahuasca? What are some spiritual dimensions of ayahuasca? Some of the things about the technology of it, in terms of what's going on in the brain, and some people's theories about that. So basically, the ayahuasca test is a guide, a basic handbook. You read this, you'll get an understanding of what this thing is if you're just embarking on it for your first time, or in the case of many, many seasoned drinkers who've already read the book, they've said, oh, I learned a lot of stuff here, and gee, I want to recommend this to anybody new. So that it's really intended to kind of fulfill that niche in the scene and be that service.
I think that's absolutely needed because, I've read a lot of books about ayahuasca, and like some of these books get really heavy into the pharmacology of it and like the
Yeah.
traditional, the history, and others are, like kind of like psychedelic
Journals.
memoirs, so to speak. And so
Right.
it's really kind of nice to have a book that just orients you, like, what is going on, like how do I have the best experience? But sometimes, a lot of the shamans that are holding ceremonies, they're not going to sit down and orient the attendees. They may not even be speak very good English. So it's really good to have some type of at least backstory to kind of understand what you're getting into.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and there are some lodges. I mean, I think Blue Morpho comes to mind, but there are others. There are some lodges where when you go to them, I think Temple of the Way of Light does this as well. You get an orientation. Okay, so like here's the basic download on what goes on here, that kind of thing, and I think it's extremely helpful. But I would agree that at this point in time, for the most part, if you go to a place for ceremony, it's more likely that there won't be some sort of an orientation, and that just at a certain time of night, you'll be advised to sit down and grab the glass and drink, and then fasten your seatbelt and.
Yeah, I would say, especially if you're drinking with the tribes, that's pretty much how it's going to be. It's
Yeah,
not going to be very well structured. There may not be anyone who is going to even tell you what's going on. Certainly, the tribal,
right.
elders and healers, they are unfamiliar with our Western neuroses and all the pharmacological, all the drugs that have emerged in
Yes.
the market to address those neuroses or mental imbalances that actually can be contradictive to ayahuasca drinking. So that can be really
Yes.
dangerous too, but they don't know because it's completely foreign to their world.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely the case, and you know, there are obviously right now we're learning to weave the, most of us, with North Americans or Europeans or Asians, coming in from different parts of the world, going to these centers. Some of these centers have a lot of Russians going through them. I've seen a
Wow.
lot of that. And so, you know, there, there's a lot going on right now. Like how do you help? I mean, I know, sometimes people go down with folks who are familiar with the scene, but a lot of people just kind of show up with their backpack on and, wind up in a maloka the next night and drinking ayahuasca and, then eventually like hours later turning to the person on the mat beside them and go, what the hell was that? So results vary, but I
Yeah,
think,
it's true,
yeah,
definitely. And
but
there's, even some cases that I've heard, especially the one fairly recently where there was the young British kid that died in ceremony in Colombia. So what are the risks of just, going down there not knowing what you're getting into?
well, I think that there are some risks, especially, you see, in Colombia, and also in the case of Kyle Nolan, who died at Chimbre outside of Puerto Maldonado in Peru, and who was buried, and then the shaman denied that he'd ever seen him. It was a whole great. In both cases, the shamans use toé. They use brugmansia, which is an added material to the ayahuasca.
Is that the
That
same as
is,
Datura?
it is the same as datura, though the blossoms are bigger. But the compounds are the same, and the physical appearance of the plants very much the same. They used to be considered the same family. Now they're not. But in any case. Um, you know, Colombia is the home of Toei shamanism. That's where it's most heavily consumed and used. And, Toei is in, over a certain concentration. It's a deadly toxic stuff. It'll kill you. It can be used as an agent of murder. And um, we don't have samples of what these people who died took, but I suspect in one case, because I know the shaman in whose hands the kid died and then was subsequently, I met this guy. And in the case, and I know that he was a Toei shaman because we talked about it. And in Colombia, I know this to be so. I think that these were probably Toei poisoning cases, and not that the ayahuasca, Banisteriopsis caapi, the vine, and Chacruna psychotria viridis, the leaf, together, that was probably not the cause. And I admit I have no evidence to back this up, but if you look at the use of these plants among these people, it's a pretty reasonable conclusion.
Interesting. Do you address any of these considerations in your book?
Yeah, I address them all
Okay,
actually.
great.
Everything from how your need to find your dose, going to shamans who are have good reputations and very well trained and don't have any known history of sexual molestation or any of that stuff, because there are a few people out there who have some problems who are living testimonies. But yeah, I really want people to be able to read this and go, well, okay, I probably don't want to at least don't want to start out drinking ayahuasca that's got toei in it. See, I don't think it's that good an idea myself. I've done it many times. I don't think it's a good idea. And just safe basic practices, and then also how to integrate this, and how ayahuasca is simultaneously a medicine. This addresses something you asked earlier. How is this particular medicine, ayahuasca, in my life and in other people's lives, helping to address some major global problems? We certainly have a major global problem with pharmaceutical poisoning of the general population. We do have this. This is a real thing. And now it's affecting public water supplies. They're full of drugs. We're drinking Viagra and, Klonopin and all kinds of stuff in water systems all over the world now. So the spirituality and the beauty of ayahuasca is that on the one hand, it is the broadest and most profound healing substance I've ever encountered or heard of in my life, and I work in this field. And secondly, it takes people completely out of the conventional spiritual model, which is you sit and somebody tells you about somebody 2,000 years ago who had a vision. Moses saw a burning bush. You're going to see a burning bush in the first 15 minutes of your first ceremony. And then you may see entire civilizations rise and fall. And God may come and sit down in front of you and say, how's it going tonight? Talk to me. Let's have a conversation here. And so what happens is people have this revolution in their, I'm not just hearing about this. This isn't something from the dust of time. This is a right here, right now, palpable, full on, 50,000 watt God experience. Yeah, I'm all in. And so we're simultaneously, in addition to revolutionizing medicine, in some corners anyway, also revolutionizing religion literally meaning remembrance of spirit. We're having spirit encounters. And that's this inexhaustible treasure trove of extraordinary goodness and life-imbuing joy and compassion and connectivity. And that has huge effects in people's behavior. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's going to correct all of our personality disorders all at once, but over time it certainly does a good scrubbing down of them.
One of the things that I like about ayahuasca is that it has very much a feeling that there is a wise presence that is teaching you.
Sure.
And that's why the natives refer to ayahuasca as a plant teacher. And I
Right.
find that some of the entheogenic agents out there that were made in labs like MDMA or LSD, they don't seem to have that type of instructional guiding sentience associated with them. And I'm kind of curious to know, have you ever done LSD, and what would your take be on the difference between ayahuasca and LSD?
Well, okay, in answer to the first question, a long, long time ago, now we're talking the late 60s and the very early 70s, I took LSD 140 times. So
Okay.
I had remarkable experiences with LSD. I also, at the tail end of it, did it concurrently with meditation and yoga, which was really interesting. Eventually gave it up because I felt that there was nothing more to learn from it. Um, I I can't thank LSD enough for what it did for most of the people I knew at the time. It turned us on to natural living. It really did. It was the catalytic agent that just went. We just kind of like went, yeah, sort of this brilliant light bulb went on. I think as a time, during that period and into the early 70s, it was astonishing. It was really, really brilliant. But I would say that ayahuasca, I mean, you can have some absolute screaming abyss trips on LSD. There's no question about it. I don't want to suggest that it's some sort of minor league thing. I mean, it's a bobsled, but ayahuasca is still of a whole greater order of magnitude. there's a thoroughness, there's a complete immersion, and I also experience, as you know, the shamans talk about, that this is a conscious living spirit, that there is a real entity here, which is not the case with LSD, which is not the case with synthesized psilocybin, or synthesized mescaline, versus peyote in the case of mescaline, and the mushrooms in the case of psilocybin, that these derive from real, and that is not a metaphor. I'm being, very clear. This is not a metaphor. So my take is that the reason that there is such brilliant healing and realizations, that's thorough and that's an inexhaustible well with ayahuasca, is that this is a conscious being.
Mm. And so, what is your take on this tidal wave of people being introduced to the plant medicine? Is it a good thing or not so good thing? Because I had heard from another ethnobotanist, actually Mark Plotkin, who was saying to me that ayahuasca and chacruna are being depleted from the jungle. And granted, you have villages that are growing these plants, but I'm kind of curious, what the pros and cons are of this sudden resurgence of interest in this plant medicine tradition.
Well, I think, Mark is very astute. I like his work a lot. I think that we do certainly need to be conscious of and working with cultivation of both copy and chacruna. I think that's a necessity. And I see that happening out there, but it probably could happen more because the crowds are just growing and growing and growing. So I think that Mark's observation is real. On the other hand, all of the centers are still getting enough vine and chacruna, and that tells me that there are more and more and more people growing this stuff. But yes, more cultivation would be a good idea, and I'm sure they're very, very quick to leap on trends down there from a growing standpoint. I'm sure that there's an enormous amount of cultivation underway right now. I'll be down there in a few weeks. I'll be in some native villages. I'll ask around, and I'm sure I'll be led into some gardens of this stuff, as I have been previously so far. In terms of, is this a good thing, I think that for the greatest number of people, this is a miracle. There are people who suffer, as soon as I drank, I started bringing people down. And I've had friends, I had a friend I brought down. He had chronic fatigue for 4.5 years. After 2 nights of drinking ayahuasca, he didn't have chronic fatigue anymore, and it never came back. And that was over 7 years ago. Brought another friend down. He'd been addicted to antidepressant drugs for 30 years. He hasn't touched an antidepressant drug in almost 4 years. He's fine. He's also disorders for trauma, sexual abuse, all the things that can derail us in our lives. We see a lot of people getting resolution, and then going further and also having really integrative spiritual experiences. So while there always will be psychedelic casualties, there will be imbalanced people who engage with any psychoactive agent, cannabis, mushrooms, peyote, or ayahuasca, but obviously ayahuasca being more extreme. There are people who are going to go off the boards. They always do. There's always somebody who will, I've seen some pretty wild stuff over the last few years. One Russian guy stripped down to his jockey shorts and did muscle poses in the middle of the Maloka all night long, and nobody could stop him because he was this powerful, muscular guy. Like, oh, please, no, man, go back to your mat. But he was a turd. Absolutely stark raving batshit crazy, and Deca guy in ceremony. And it took 6 guys to bring this guy to the ground, tie him up, and hose him off for hours. Those are the extremes, but they will happen. But for the most people, this is a phenomenal thing, and also something else that's marvelous. And I'm sure Mark would, probably agree with this. Shamanism has been a dying trade, if you will. And it's not just a trade, obviously. Shamans have played important roles, at least as pharmacologists and doctors and healers in their villages, and usually more than that. And this surge in interest in and demand for ayahuasca shamanism is now actually expanding once again, surprisingly, something that was contracting terribly. It's often been said that when a shaman dies, it's like losing, an encyclopedia. So oddly, a
Yeah, when a
stampede
shaman
of gringos
dies,
down to South. What?
when a shaman dies, it's like losing an encyclopedia, did you say?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
But if you can, now we're seeing more people sticking around instead of going and becoming, taxi drivers in Lima. They're staying in the forest and learning shamanism and learning plant medicines. And so for the first time in a long, long, long time, there are more shamans. That's pretty good. That's a good thing. That bodes well for the future.
Yeah, I had another conversation with Susanna Bustos, who is the wife of Robert Tyndall, whose second chapter of his then unpublished book, The Jaguar That Roams the Mind, opened up a whole world of experiences for me with the Kaxinawa tribe of Brazil, and I've been going back there since for the past 10 years, and I would say I have lifelong friendships with them. And it's interesting. So she was saying too that she's seeing a resurgence of vegetalismo in terms of like more people being willing to stick around and learn how to practice
Yeah.
traditional healing with different plants, not just the psychoactive ones. And then what I've also seen too personally in
Right.
Brazil, after 500 years of persecution and just horrible, from like just, genocide to enslavement on the rubber plantations, this whole international ayahuasca movement is actually creating a cultural renaissance in amongst the tribes
Yes.
in Brazil. And it's just a
Yeah.
wonderful thing to see. These tribes are reclaiming their heritage, trying to learn their songs again. This one tribe that I spent time
Yeah.
with, the Kuntanawas, they lost their language. So what they did was
Mm.
they invited the other tribes in the Pano-linguistic group to come and participate in these cultural exchanges. And then they're trying to learn their language and their culture back from these other tribes that actually never didn't lose it to the degree that they
Uh,
did. And so it's just been a wonderful thing to see the healing that comes to these communities. Like one community, the Puyanawas, the the son of the chief, and he's actually like now the chief right now, but he was like the no, he's the son of the pastor, who was also the chief, and then he was also the pastor, so he was like evangelical. And at one point, because his daughter really needed healing, he turned and went back to the traditional ways and actually invited in the Ashaninkas to teach them, how to work with the plants. And they
okay.
brought back their ceremonies. Like they now have them like twice a week. And then basically about 60% of the church, of the evangelical church, just gave up Christianity and went over, and now they're like practicing their ayahuasca, their bi-weekly ayahuasca ceremonies and singing their traditional songs. So it's a wonderful thing to see,
Sure.
even
Sure.
locally.
Sure. Sure.
So I did want to
But
bring
this
up.
is mostly very, very positive.
Yeah. So I did want to bring up something that you mentioned earlier, which was okay, having to find the good shamans, the shamans that are not, womanizers or going to hit on the women or, do any sketchy brujeria stuff. And, one of the things that I've seen just, that I've thought of having seen so much sketchiness, go on in the Amazon and, shady shamans. It would be such a great thing if there could be some type of ayahuasca shamanic Hippocratic oath that the shamans take or the centers take, and I understand that it's a very complex issue that's very difficult to enforce. But when I came across an organization called the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council, it sounded like that was kind of like what they were going towards. However, there's a lot of controversy over their operations or over their mission. So I'd love to ask you about what your thoughts are on the ESC and what the controversy is all about.
Yeah. Okay. I actually, for the briefest possible period of time, was on the ESC board. And I left basically because I disagreed with pretty much its premise. Um, it's a great name. I do want to say it's a wonderful name. Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council sounds, credible and thoughtful and very much oriented toward the protection of the environment, and it's a beautiful name. Um, the concern that I have is that, without just getting too personal, is that I, I, my experience is that it was founded on an utter lack of knowledge of the scene of ayahuasca, of shamanism, that it was a somewhat messianic reaction to a first time drinking vision, which has happened to a lot of people. A lot of people, go out after their first ceremony and they, they met with the ayahuasca. This happens. But in any case, any attempt to, they really want shamans and shamanic centers to participate as paying certified members in an approval scheme according to practices and principles drawn up by the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council itself, which doesn't, by the way, have any ethnobotanists on it. And has no native people and has no shamans and was not founded on any relationship with any of those people. So I am, as it turns out, somewhat sadly, because it's a horrific waste of time, I'm a vociferous opponent of the ESC, in my opinion, and I say this with no anger or hostility, is that it should either be completely dismantled down to the last toothpick and twig, or they should gut any notion whatsoever of approving, rating, charge membership fees from or for, or in any way being the arbiters of good shamanic practices, overseeing the centers or the shamans in the Amazon. They have no business doing that, no experience doing that. This is not coming from people who've worked down there for 15 years and lived with native folks and spent time with shamans and drunk a lot and seen things that could be corrected and been asked to help. Nobody asked for this. So that's probably the harshest opinion you'll get on ESC, but I don't think it's a worthy thing. I think it's demeaning and imperious and insulting to the traditional knowledge of, the shamans for the most part are multi-generational healers. I learned from my father, who learned from his mother, who learned from her grandfather, who learned from, his, and it goes on and on and on and on and on like that. And you don't drink once and decide you're going to be the visionary defender and protector of ayahuasca and then go raging around trying to start a scheme that approves shamans and centers.
Wow. So, do you think there's anything that they could do to actually, make their work, I guess, more valuable to all its constituents, I guess, to actually be the Ethnobotanical Stewardship Council?
Well, they could steward ethnobotany for a start. I mean,
What would that
but
look like to
that's
you?
not an organization building activity. I would, I mean, if it were me, and it's not, and nobody's asked other than you, I would focus on exactly what you brought up and what Mark brought up. If in fact there's potential for diminished supplies of Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridis, then it makes a lot of sense to work with all kinds of entities, forestry experts, etc., to generate the cultivation of these things so that we cultural economies. That would be a very worthy thing. But rating and approving shamans, I mean, that's just not that's not legitimate to me at
Hmm.
all.
Yeah, I will be honest in that at one point in my, like journey with this plant medicine tradition, I kind of wondered, would it be possible to have some type of rating system? Because, there's some shamans, and I mean, how would you know exactly whether or not you've got a sketchy shaman that's going to hit on you if you're alone and female? And so, could there be a way to like have some
Yeah,
type of user generated crowdsourced platform that says, okay, this shaman's legit and this center is legit? Or, but then when I think of, I mean, being a business person, I like to think about execution. How easy is it to pull off this
right,
concept? And it seems
right.
incredibly difficult because, some of these retreat centers, they don't necessarily, work with the same shaman all the time. And then secondly, like, how would you
Sure,
regulate
sure.
brujeria as well? Like, it's all happening in like the unseen world. You don't know if someone's like throwing a hex on you, 50 kilometers away, or, shot some energetic arrows,
Yeah.
virotes at you. And you don't know. So it's hard to regulate.
Well, I think that regulating is not necessary. I think that communicating is, and I think a lot of it's happening on the ayahuasca forums. And certainly more could. In terms of rating, I remember I used to drive across country using the Rand McNally road atlases and the camping guides. And you could look up a park, for example, that was 100 miles away, and it would say it has, showers, electricity, water, whatever. Or, it didn't have any of those things. For somebody to do a sort of a travel guide kind of, yeah, this lodge has whatever, no showers, no toilets.
there,
Yeah, that'd be fine.
there's a
That'd be fine.
dugout
But
hole for the toilet. No hot
yeah,
showers.
yeah, these people compost. I mean, whatever. But that's a different thing. That's a different thing. I also believe that ayahuasca, the nature of it is not about centralization and control and regulation. It's about expansion. And, if many, many people communicate what to look for, I mean, I do so in my new book, and I'm not alone in that. Lots of people are communicating very well what to look for. You know, don't just walk up to any person who's got a stick of mapacho and some sketchy looking fluid in a plastic bottle and say, let's do ceremony. I mean, do your homework, find out who's good, and ask more than one person, and find out if anybody's had, if there've been any reports of the person going after sex, or that actually can be found out fairly quickly. So part of it is that people as prospective journeyers also need to be savvy the way they would be. I mean, I don't want to reduce it to this, but the way that if they were going to go buy an expensive TV, okay, find out the features. How's the warranty? I mean, find out the features of this shaman. Is this some, sketchy person who was like totally unknown until a month ago, and then all of a sudden, started doing ceremonies out of a little hut? Is this somebody who's, highly experienced and very well regarded, and there are no scandals surrounding them? We have to find out these things. But I am vociferously against an approval system of
Mm-hmm.
any kind,
Yeah, I
because
think
we have no business approving the native traditions.
right. Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think one of the challenges that arises that maybe, this whole system was intending to address is how to really know beyond the rumor mill. So, with the case of like a television, you could kind of, do look in Amazon.com, look at the user reviews and, do a little, more, research on Google and stuff like that. But I think like, when I think of the case of a particular Peruvian shaman who's actually really well known. He's almost like a rock star shaman. He travels around the world, makes a lot of money holding ceremonies. I had a very weird experience.
I drank with him for
I'm sorry?
I drank with him for I drank with him 45 times. I know who you're talking about.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to mention any names here, but I did have an experience, and it was entirely
No.
energetic of spirits coming out of a portal the day after the ceremony was over and taking my energy without my permission. So that was totally weird, and I
Mm,
couldn't get anyone. I couldn't reach the shaman. I couldn't reach, the organizer of that ceremony was really just offering her house, so she wasn't even in a position to deal with this. And later on, I had heard that, this shaman also had some history with women, like, a bit nefarious history with women. And at the same time, I know some people that swear by the shaman. So it's a bit of a
mhm.
mixed bag. It's like, who do you trust? Like, the people that I know that swear by the shaman are men.
Right.
The people that I've heard of having weird experiences are women. So, what do you do? Like, unless you're plugged into the community and know how to like ask and, kind of tie into the rumor mill and, talk to people, it might be very difficult
Right.
to come up with verifiable data.
Well, okay. I kind of agree with all points of view actually on this one. I mean, I know who you're talking about, and I will say that he is an individual of staggering shamanic talent, which is one of the reasons he gets away with what he does, because he is so extraordinarily capable in ceremony. It's actually just downright shocking. Doesn't mean everybody has a good experience. Obviously, you having the experience of your energy being taken away, that's not a good experience. But many of us who drank with him for years, who haven't drunk with him for years now, exactly because of um, the difficulties that he has. But and his center is faltering and all of that, and I wish him no ill, because I certainly benefited in extraordinary ways. I said, I drank with him like 45 times. But if you go to Iquitos and you talk with more than two people, you will readily get that information. The greatest majority of people, if you mention his name, they will go, oh, no, no, we don't recommend that anymore. So and these things are difficult because you have to be sure and all of that. But uh, there are enough good people offering ceremonies, especially in the Iquitos area, that, if you go to a couple of the predictable restaurants and you ask more than a few people, you're likely to get good information that I think can keep most people on a good course.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we are coming to the end of our segment here, and I have really appreciated this insightful conversation. Thank you so much. So I want to leave you with the last couple of
Thank you,
questions.
Lorna.
This is my favorite question to ask, Chris. What is the most
Okay.
far out experience you've had drinking ayahuasca?
Oh, the most far out experience I've had drinking ayahuasca probably was the experience I had the second night that I drank. when I was approached and overwhelmed by a gigantic anaconda, an immense anaconda, brilliantly psychedelic with that geometric matrix that is so part of the Shipibo tradition and the Ashaninka too. And it hovered over me for hours, energy and taunting me, and it was hilarious. It was just hilarious. It was so overpowering, and it would go, so do you think you can sit up? And I go, no way. And it was just beating the hell out of me with this energy for hours. And then I went up to the shaman in question, and actually, that who called, and my entire body was on fire, and my back was exploding with light, and everybody in the whole malo was torches, and the shaman in question was just all like billions of points of light and these energy grids, and just, and that was probably among many outlandish nights, and being swallowed by snakes, and having snakes go in my nose to eat up dark matter in my body, and crystal skulls vomiting jewels down my throat, the whole 9 yards. I would probably rate that night as the craziest, most rock and roll ayahuasca night of my life.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing. So, another question for you. What does it mean to you to evolve as a human being? And especially through tapping into the power of these visionary experiences. How can we use these visionary experiences to evolve as human beings? That's my question.
I think it means to evolve as a human being is to be increasingly immersed in love. I think that it's funny. I had a funny experience years ago when I asked the ayahuasca to show me my spirit allies. And anyway, I wound up completely immersed in love. And a couple of times the ayahuasca came to me in the middle of this immersion and said, would you like to see your spirit allies now? And I go away. I'm just like, I'm in this ocean of love, and this happened several times. And finally I said, no, I don't want to see my spirit allies. This is the end of the line. This is as good as it gets. And the ayahuasca went, good choice. And that was it. I think what it means to evolve is to be more and more and more infused with an emissary of love. And I think that ayahuasca experience, if you drink, you're going to find yourself totally and completely immersed in love and gratitude, and sending out love to the unlikeliest people that you've encountered in your life, and just doing so with genuine compassion and appreciation and best wishes. And this is the real promise of this stuff. It's not to be able to say, yeah, man, I was on a golden ship with, parrots that spoke Spanish, but to say, yes, I get that the only worthy thing is love. So how do I engage in the world in a way that, is most in that spirit?
Thank you so much for sharing that. How can we best stay in touch with you, Chris?
You can go to my website, medicinehunter.com, which my wife Zoe has loved this amount of stuff all the time, but it would just be like a sort of a wake behind me. But she has made a beautiful site. So medicinehunter.com, and there's contact information there. And I would also say that if you want to know more about ayahuasca, pick up the Ayahuasca Test Pilots Handbook. It's available basically wherever books are sold.